Another Sutta study session. So this morning we'll be looking at a discourse from the Anguttara Nikaya. We can start by paying homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So, as mentioned, we'll be looking at a discourse from the Anguttara Nikaya today. This is a relatively short discourse from the Book of the Fives, which is called the Dhana Sutta, the Sutta on Wealth. And so it says Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 5, Sutta number 47. So as usual, I'll read through the sutta in Pali and explain the meaning of the words and the relevance. And then I'll take any questions you have at the end. So the sutta begins. Panchamani bhikkhave dhanani. So the Buddha is saying there are these 5 kinds of wealth, of dhana. So dhana means wealth. Katamani pancha, what 5? Saddha dhanang. So saddha is faith or confidence or conviction. Sila dhanang. So sila, we spoke about precepts quite extensively yesterday. So sila is one meaning of the word precept. Sila also has a more general meaning of virtue or morality or wholesome conduct, wholesome habits. Sutta dhanang, so the wealth of sutta. So this particular word, so sutta, S-U-T-A, not to be confused with the word sutta, S-U-T-T-A. So sutta means one of the discourses of the Buddha, whereas the word sutta, so S-U-T-A, means what one has heard, or what one has listened to. So sutta has the more general meaning of learning, of education, of what one has learned and understood. Chaga dhanang, so chaga means, actually it has 2 meanings. One meaning is generosity, and the other meaning is relinquishment. So the word chaga has both the meaning of giving things away, giving things to others, and also giving up, giving things up. And the 5th quality is panya dhanang. So panya is wisdom or discernment. And then the Buddha defines each of these terms. So the first one, he says, Katamacha bhikkhave saddha dhanang. So, and what is the wealth of faith? What is this kind of wealth that we call saddha, faith or conviction? And he says, Ida bhikkhave arya savako saddho hoti, saddhahati tathagata saboding. So he says, here a disciple of the noble. Okay, we just had a temporary technical glitch, but we seem to be back. So again, the first one here, Katamacha bhikkhave saddha dhanang. So what is the wealth of faith? Ida bhikkhave arya savako saddho hoti, saddhati tathagata saboding. So here a disciple of the noble ones has faith in the awakening of the Tathagata. So this is the most basic definition of faith in Buddhism. It's confidence that the Buddha was in fact an awakened being. Confidence that the Buddha really had eliminated all of his defilements and developed a clear, direct understanding of the true nature of reality. And so it further clarifies. So one has faith in this way. Itipiso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho. So the Buddha is Bhagava. So Bhagava is fortunate, one who has the highest fortune, the best luck, someone who's achieved the most valuable thing. So Bhagava Arahang. So Arahang, the worthy one. Samma Sambuddho, the completely awakened one. Arahang Samma Sambuddho. Vijacharana Sampanno, the one whose knowledge and conduct are impeccable. Sugato. So Sugato means one who goes well, one who goes through the world happily. Can also mean one who's reached a good destination. Lokavidu, one who knows the world, one who understands how the world operates, who understands the nature of the world. Anutro Prasadamassarati, so the unsurpassable trainer of those who wish to be trained, of those who can be trained. So another quality of a Buddha is that a Buddha is fully capable of teaching people how to attain awakening, if they're interested, if they're ready. Satta Deva Manusanang, the teacher of both celestial and human beings. This is another important quality about the Buddha. The Buddha was not the student of angels or spirits or gods or deities of any sort, but rather spirits and divine beings would come to the Buddha for instruction, because the wisdom of the Buddha surpasses even that of heavenly beings. Satta Deva Manusanang Buddho Bhagavati. So Buddha, again, the one who is completely awake, the one who has woken up to the nature of reality. So this is what we define as faith in Buddhism. So it's faith that the Buddha was completely awakened, completely pure, that he was a perfect teacher, and that there's no being in the world that can be considered higher or more superior than the Buddha. And so if one has this kind of confidence or conviction, so confidence that the Buddha was a fully awakened being and a perfect teacher, then this is true wealth. This is the sort of wealth which is of the most benefit. The second one, he says, Katamancha bhikkhave sila danang. What is the wealth of virtue? It says, Ida bhikkhave arya savako. So here, a disciple of the noble ones. Panatipata pativirito. So he refrains from panatipata. He refrains from killing living beings. Adinadana pativirito. So refrains from stealing, from taking what is not given. Kame sumechachara pativirito. So one refrains from sexual misconduct. Musavada pativirito. So one refrains from telling lies. And sura mereya majjapamada tana pativirito. So one refrains from consuming alcohol or any other intoxicant that causes heedlessness, negligence. So we talked in a fair amount of detail yesterday about precepts, particularly about the 5 precepts and the value of these 5 precepts. So I won't go into too much more detail here. But again, what the Buddha is emphasizing here is that if one keeps the 5 precepts, then this is like, it's like having a lot of money in your bank account. So often we think like, oh, if I just accumulate more money, then my life will be better. If I accumulate more financial wealth, then my life will be better. But the Buddha is saying that actually the best kind of wealth to accumulate is moral wealth. So the wealth of morality, the wealth of virtue. This is what true wealth can be defined as. Then the third one, it says, Katamacha bhikkhave sutta danang. So what is the wealth of education, of learning? Ida bhikkhave arya savako bahusuto hoti. So he says here, a disciple of the noble ones has learned much. So they have a lot of education. But he specifically defines what he means by this. So he says, Bahusuto hoti suttadoro suttasannichayo. So one has learned a lot. One retains what one has learned. So one upholds it and maintains it in one's mind. Sutta Sannichyo. Sannichyo means to accumulate or stockpile. So one stockpiles knowledge about the suttas. One stockpiles knowledge about the Dhamma. And he clarifies, Yete Dhamma, so those Dhammas, which are Adi Kalyana, so good in the beginning. Majje Kalyana, good in the middle. Paryosana Kalyana, good in their conclusion. So again, this is talking about the Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha. So the teachings of the Buddha are, they're good in the beginning. So when one starts with the beginner level practices of Buddhism, then you can get positive effects immediately. You can feel the blessings and benefits of this practice immediately. It's good in the middle. So also when you've been practicing for a while, you'll notice that it just keeps bringing more and more happiness and peace into your life. And it's good in its conclusion. So the final goal of Buddhism is perfect unconditional happiness, complete wisdom and understanding of the nature of reality, and a boundless compassion. So this thing that the Dhamma is good in the beginning, the middle, and the end is very important, because, for example, some of the teachings at the time of the Buddha were that if you just torture yourself for long enough, it'll be very painful in the beginning and painful in the middle, but at the end, somehow it will be completely purify your karma, and then things will be great. So there was this idea that you just had to slog through the painful toil and eventually you'll get your reward. But Buddhist practice is different. Buddhist practice is about immediately right now recognizing our dukkha and eliminating our dukkha right now. So you can start to make progress on this right now, becoming a happier and more peaceful person right now. Similarly, also when you've been practicing for a long time, actually usually what happens is the longer you practice Buddhism, the more enthusiasm you get for it. And this is because you see the difference in your own life. You see the improvement and development in your own mind. And good in its conclusion. So this also is important. So the final goal of Buddhism is what we call Nibbana. And I've encountered a fair number of people who, when you mention the word Nibbana, they actually get a little bit scared, or it makes them feel a little bit uncomfortable. I remember many years ago, there was a person who was a dancer who went to a senior monk and was asking questions about Nibbana, and the dancer said, well, is there any dancing in Nibbana? And the monk was like, no, technically no, there's no dancing in Nibbana. And the dancer was like, well, in that case, I don't want to go. And it's like, well, okay, but that's kind of missing the point. So again, this person had this idea that Nibbana was this kind of grim, boring, dull place where there was no dancing, no fun. But that's really missing the point, because the Buddha says over and over again that Nibbana is the highest form of happiness. One of my favorite quotes from the suttas is Nibbanang paramang sukhang. And Nibbana is the highest form of happiness. Nibbana is the paramount pleasure. Nibbanang paramang sukhang. So again, people sometimes get this misconception that practice Buddhism and it makes you a little bit happier in the beginning and even more happy in the middle, and then you get to the end and poof, you just cease to exist and blank out into this black, bleak emptiness, nothingness. But that's not the Buddha's teachings at all. Rather, it's one of ever increasing happiness and joy until finally one reaches the ultimate infinite happiness of complete awakening. So yete dhamma adi kalyana, majje kalyana, paryosana kalyana, satang sabhyanjanang. So with the words and phrases. So one learns the Dhamma according to as it was recorded. So once one grasps the meaning of it. So satang can also mean based upon its meaning. So satang, so with the right meaning. Sabhyanjanang, with the right phrasing. So one learns the Dhamma with the right meaning and the right phrasing. This means that one makes an effort to really understand what the Dhamma is. One makes an effort to know the meaning of it, the purpose of it, the benefit of it. And one also learns the right phrasing. So if one gets the phrasing all mixed around or takes things out of context, then sometimes one will misunderstand them. So it's good to also understand the proper wording and phrasing of things. So one thing which people sometimes find frustrating when they first start reading the suttas is the amount of repetition. But actually the repetition is very useful, because when you hear the same things over and over again, then you'll naturally start to memorize them. You'll naturally start to imprint it on your mind. And also you'll start to get a sense of what the right way is, the right way to speak about the Dhamma is. So that then when you encounter wrong teachings, which unfortunately are very common these days, misrepresentations of Buddhism, again, they're distressingly common these days, you'll instantly recognize, oh wait, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel quite like what the Buddha was teaching in the suttas. Something's off here. So you'll be able to recognize that it isn't actually the teachings of the Buddha, but it's something else. The next adjective for the Dhamma that's given here, Kevala Paripunnang Parisuddhang Brahmacharyang. So teachings which are connected with the completely perfect and completely pure spiritual life. So this is another characteristic of the Dhamma, is that the Dhamma is giving a complete, thorough description of how to live a spiritual life which is utterly pure and blameless, and which leads inevitably towards awakening. And it says, Tatarupasa Dhamma, so of these sorts of Dhammas, so it's emphasizing here that when the Buddha talks about being well educated and very educated, he's not talking about understanding calculus and physics and Heidegger or any of that kind of nonsense, but rather he's talking about having a thorough understanding of the Dhamma which leads to awakening. This is the only kind of education which really matters. So Tatarupasa Dhamma Bahusutta, so one has learned a lot or is well educated about these kinds of Dhammas. So Dhata, one holds them, one maintains them. Vachasa Parichitta Manasanupekita, so one recites them verbally. So one is constantly, so both chanting suttas, reciting suttas, but also talking about the suttas. So discussing the Dhamma with others, speaking about the Dhamma with others. Manasanupekita means one has closely examined it with one's mind. So again, it's not enough just to read Dhamma and learn about Dhamma. It's important also to really think about it and reflect deeply upon the meaning of the Dhamma. Ditya Supatividdha means one has pierced through it with view. So one clearly sees it in detail. One thoroughly and clearly sees the meaning of the Dhamma and sees it in one's own life. So again, this is the wealth of education. So what is true wealth in this case? It's to have a wealth of information about the Dhamma, a wealth of knowledge about the suttas, a wealth of understanding of what the suttas mean. And the fourth kind of wealth that Buddha mentions, Katamancha Bhikkhave Chaga Danang. So what is the wealth of Chaga? So again, Chaga means generosity, but it also means relinquishment, letting go. Says Ida Bhikkhave Arya Savako, so here a disciple of the noble ones, Vigata Malamache Reina, so without stinginess. Cetasa Agarang, so with a mind that is not stained by stinginess. Agarang Ajavasati, so when one is living a household life. Mutta Chago, so one is practicing generosity, letting go. Payatapani means with an open hand, so open-handed. So one is generous in that one's hand is always open to give things to others. Vosagarato means one delights in relinquishment. One delights in letting go of things. Yacha yogo means one is committed to charity. One is committed to giving charity. Dana sangvibhaga. So sangvibhaga means to share. So dana sangvibhaga means one delights in giving and sharing. He says, Erangvurchati bhikkhave chaga danang. So this is the wealth of chaga, of generosity and relinquishment. So this is where one delights in giving things to others. One delights in relinquishing things, and particularly relinquishing things for the benefit of others. And finally, the fifth one, Katamacha bhikkhave panyadanang. What is the wealth of wisdom? It says, Ida bhikkhave arya savako panyava hoti. So here, a disciple of the noble ones is wise. Udayata gaminiya panyaya samanagato. So one has the wisdom which knows the arising and vanishing of phenomena. So udaya means arising, and atagamaniya means disappearing or vanishing. So here the Buddha is defining wisdom in terms of clearly seeing impermanence, clearly seeing the insubstantiality of all things, clearly seeing that every single thing in every moment is constantly appearing and disappearing, arising and ceasing. So nothing has any lasting substance, lasting existence of any kind. It says, Aryaya nibbedikaya. So this is the kind of wisdom which leads to a noble breakthrough. Nibbedika means a breakthrough. And samma dukkha kaya gamaniya, and which leads to a correct and complete elimination of dukkha, correct and complete elimination of suffering. So this also is important because here the Buddha is emphasizing that to directly perceive the arising and ceasing of phenomena is a practice which naturally leads to attainment of noble wisdom and the elimination of one's dukkha. So he says, Irangvachati bhikkhave panyadanang. This is the wealth of wisdom. And again, this is something truly valuable. So all five of these are things which are truly valuable because all of them are things which lead both to happiness here and now, but also which conduce to achieving the most valuable goal imaginable, which is the attainment of complete awakening. He says, Emaniko bhikkhave panchadanani. So these are 5 kinds of wealth. And then it ends with a short poem. So as I mentioned yesterday, this is the standard feature that we find all throughout the Anguttara Nikaya. Many Anguttara Nikaya suttas conclude with a short Pali poem. So this one says, Yasa saddha tathagate achala supatitita. So for one who has faith in the Tathagata, in the Buddha, faith which is unshakable and well established. Silancha yasa kalyanang aryakantang pasangsitang, and who also has wholesome virtue, the kind which is approved of and praised by noble beings. Sanghe pasado yasati ujubutancha dasanang, and it says, and one who has faith in the Sangha. So the Sangha is the monastic order. So the order of bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, samaneras, and samaneries. This is what we mean by the Sangha. Sangha pasado yasati ujubutancha dasanam. So one who has faith in the Sangha and who sees those who are upright. So upright here means those who are committed to living a blameless life, a pure life, a virtuous life. Adalido ti tang ahu amogang tasajivatang. So the Buddha says, that kind of person, I say, is not poor, and their life is not empty. Their life is not hollow. So again, the Buddha is emphasizing, even if you don't have a lot of money, if you have this deep faith in the Buddha and in the Sangha, if you're rooted in virtue, and if you have the other forms of wealth you mentioned, so the wealth of knowledge of the suttas, of generosity, relinquishment, and the wealth of wisdom of knowing impermanence. He says, then you cannot be called poor. Even if you don't have a lot of money, you have a form of wealth which is much more valuable. These 5 kinds of wealth. And even if you don't achieve much in a worldly sense in your life, then your life cannot be said to be hollow and meaningless because you've achieved something far more valuable. So maybe you don't have a PhD, maybe you're not famous, maybe you never got published in the New York Times or whatever. Well, that's fine. Your life is not meaningless because you've done something far more important, which is to cultivate these 5 kinds of wealth. And then the verse continues, Tasma sadanchasi lancha pasadang dhamma dasanang anuyunje tume davi sarang buddhana sasanang. So it says, therefore, virtue, faith, and confidence, seeing the Dhamma, a wise person is committed to these things and always remembers the teachings of the Buddhas. So that's the end of this discourse. So at this point, we can respect the sutta with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And at this time, I can take any questions that you might have. So first off, hello to all the people joining in online. So hello to Jayanta, Parigupta, Binaural Dean, Usha, John, Metta, good name, Julie, Paul, Sangtong, Vivian, Sud, Siri, Jomen, Jay, Pial, and Indira. Welcome to all of you. And I see a couple questions. So Jay says, the first precept is not killing living beings. I tried telling that to someone and they said plants are also living beings. Is that true according to the Dhamma? Not really. So in the suttas, the Buddha occasionally refers to plants as single faculty life. Which means that they're a form of life, but they have no consciousness. So there's a way which you can say that they're alive, but they have no consciousness. There's no sentience. There's no being there. So killing a plant is not considered to be killing a sentient being in Buddhism. So this is different in some other traditions. So where some confusion arises is from Jainism. So Jainism was around at the same time as Buddhism. And Jainism, on the other hand, did have the belief that plants were sentient beings. And so they have a lot of precepts about not damaging plants, which makes perfect sense in Jainism because there was the belief that plants are sentient. In Buddhism, there's not the belief that plants are sentient. And for lay people, there's nothing wrong with damaging plants. But we should be attentive to the fact that plants are often homes to other sentient beings. So for example, we have a story in the Vinaya of a monk who started chopping down a tree. And there was a deva, so an angel or a heavenly spirit, was living in that tree. And she became very upset and she told the monk, "You're destroying my home. Please stop chopping down this tree. This is my home." And the monk didn't care. He just kept chopping the tree. So the deva went and complained to the Buddha and said, this is not proper. This monk is chopping down my tree. So the Buddha gave her another tree to live in. And according to the commentaries, it was quite an upgrade. It was much nicer than the deva's previous tree. But that's a side point. And then the Buddha made a rule that monks should not chop down trees. So here it's not because of the tree itself, but rather because of the beings that live in the tree. So this is something that one does need to consider. So not recklessly destroying vegetation and plants, but when it's necessary, it's okay because they're not sentient beings. And Bhavani says, what is meant by anutarang punya ketang lokasati? Anutarang punya ketang lokasati. So that's actually in the recollection of the Sangha. So it's a little bit off topic. So I think it's better to bring that question to monk chat this evening. And Sud says, how does one keep reminding oneself of one's true wealth in the midst of the world where only temporary material wealth is valued? Actually, by reading the suttas. So reading suttas like this will remind you. In fact, if suttas like this are good for you, you can even chant them every day as part of your own daily practice. And also spending time with people who understand true wealth. So spending time with other Buddhist practitioners who understand that true wealth is to hold these qualities of mind. It doesn't have anything to do with how much money or possessions you have, but rather it has to do with the quantity of goodness that you hold in your own life, in your own mind. Well, this is how we define true wealth. So yeah, associate with wise people, associate with the kind of people who understand what true wealth is as the Buddha defined it. And that's the last question from online. Any questions from the residents here? No? Okay. So I think that's it for now. So this evening we'll have our usual weekly monk chat, so you can come and join at 7:30 with any question whatsoever related to Buddhism, and we'll do our best to answer. So we can end the session with 3 more sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.